Americans make up just 4% of the world's population, yet Americans own almost half of all civilian firearms on the planet. Between January 1st and today, that's 145 days, there have been 212 mass shootings in the United States. Now, do the math. That's almost 1.5 every day. On Tuesday, a heavily armed man walked into an elementary school classroom in Texas. Police shot and killed him, but not before he shot and killed 19 children and 2 teachers. The deadliest school shooting in a decade. Tonight, the world is asking America yet again, why? I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
I can't imagine going through that with one of my grandkids. My heart is broken.
This town is hurt.
Just days after a shooter walked into a grocery store to gun down African-American patrons, we have another Sandy Hook on our hands.
These kids were always angels, but yesterday they gained their wings.
Also coming up, a damning report on Britain's Partygate scandal was made public today. The conclusion, the British have every right to expect better from their leader. So this is what the Prime Minister offered today.
And I want to begin today by renewing my apology to the House, to the whole country. And I want to conclude by saying that I, Mr. Speaker, I am humbled and I have learned a lesson, Mr. Speaker.
To our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with the deadliest school shooting the United States has seen in a decade. On Tuesday, an 18-year-old man walked into an elementary school in the small town of Uvalde, Texas. He was armed with multiple weapons. Later, police arrived and were able to shoot and kill the gunman, but not before he was able to shoot and kill 19 children and 2 teachers, all of them in the same classroom. The reaction in the United States is one that we have seen so many times before. The U.S. president demanding that Congress deliver what an overwhelming majority of Americans say they support: sensible gun control, such as background checks for people wanting to purchase a firearm. And then the response, like clockwork, comes from congressmen lamenting the tragic loss of life, but adding they oppose any idea restricting Americans' constitutional right to bear arms. America's paralysis over gun control, predictable but also volatile. Today at a press conference, Texas Governor Greg Abbott was interrupted by Democrat politician Beto O'Rourke. We want to show you what happened, but be warned, there is some strong language here.
And at this time, I will pass the mic to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick.
Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me.
Sit down.
You're out of line and an embarrassment.
Sit down and don't play this stuff.
The next shooting is right now, and you are doing nothing.
No, he needs to get his ass out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable when you...
Sir, you're out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium. I can't believe you're a sick son of a bitch that would come to a deal like this to make a political issue.
We want to go now to Stefan Simons, our correspondent. He joins me from outside the Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas. Stefan, we just saw Beto O'Rourke trying to confront the Texas governor over his record on gun control. Now, the governor and his supporters obviously do not want to talk about this. What about the American public? They want more than just talk, right?
Yeah, latest poll suggests actually that 90%, up to 90% of Americans want change. Now, when I say change, I don't mean to unearth or not implement the Constitution, get rid of the Second Amendment, which guarantees the right of for every American to bear arms, but better controls, better background checks, red flag, the so-called red flag states, what they have implemented, a better system to flag up warning signs, to make things like this, what happened here, at least, if not impossible, but harder. And that is actually what I think most Americans would go with. However, there is the Republicans and almost all of the senators in Congress in Washington, D.C., as well as a lot of governors, including the Texas governor, Mr. Abbott, who do not want to have it. They will not touch it. To the contrary, they actually lessen controls and restrictions for U.S. citizens to get guns.
Stefan, this is not the first mass shooting in the U.S. that you have covered. I'm wondering what stands out most to you this time, especially from the people that you've talked with there in Texas.
Texans have the image in the United States, maybe even worldwide, to be the rough and tumble. Every Texan are carrying a gun or having guns in their pickup trucks and wearing cowboy hats. Well, that's not true, not at all. And here in this community, it's a tight-knit community, 16,000 people. Here around me, around this elementary school, people know each other, okay, and they are in shock. They would never ever have guessed. And that's probably normal, because nobody would have ever guessed that it hits them. And therefore, their whole world changed. And you can see that they are not just sad, they're not just traumatized, they are literally in shock. They would have never guessed that something like this is happening here. Well, as you pointed out, 212 mass shootings in 145 days in this year. So do the math. Yeah, it happens everywhere. It happens all the time, and no community seems to be safe from something similar to this or something like this happening. And people here understand that now. That's at least what they're saying.
Our very own Stefan Simons with the latest tonight from Uvalde, Texas. Stefan, thank you. My next guest tonight knows firsthand the terror of a school shooting. On Valentine's Day in 2018, a gunman entered a high school in Parkland, Florida. 17 people died. Louis Mizen was a student at that school. He, his fellow classmates, and their teacher survived by hiding in a closet. Louis is now a university student in Tallahassee, Florida. That's where he joins me tonight. Louis, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. Tell me, where were you, what were you doing, and what went through your mind when you heard about the school shooting in Texas yesterday?
I was actually driving back up from Parkland back to university, and I stopped off and I checked my phone, and it was obviously it come up on the news that at the time it was less people than it ended up being. But yeah, it was all over the news. And
what did you think when you heard that people had been shot inside a school by a gunman?
Devastated. I think that they now have the grave misfortune of being part of that unfortunate club of people who have gone through this. And unfortunately, it's a club that keeps growing. And it's an awful thing to experience. And my heart goes out to the people out there.
A majority of Americans, the polls tell us this, say that they support background checks for people who want to purchase a firearm. And yet, every attempt to make background checks mandatory, those attempts have been shot down in the U.S. Congress. Is it clear to you why that is?
Yeah, not just as having gone through it and having seen it firsthand, but also as a political science student. The gun lobby in the United States is one of the most powerful in the country, and it very much gets to dictate how politicians vote on the issue.
Yeah, a few years ago, The Economist interviewed you about gun control and the gun lobby, the National Rifle Association. You were quoted as saying, and we wanted to show our viewers that quote, you said, "I've met a couple of NRA members. And I can see they're passionate about the issue. But one of the things that have failed to show is that they do care about the issue. Maybe more people would feel less like they're the enemy if they were more caring and more sensitive to the issue, but they're not. Do you still feel that way now?
I do. I think that when I spoke to them, it was clear that they cared, but unfortunately, the NRA is a brand. It's an organization, and it has its own message and its own branding, and its branding is one that doesn't seem to care about human lives and care even less about children's lives. And it's unfortunate that that kind of organization has the level of power that it does in the United States government.
You are a university student now. Your generation, you're on the cusp of moving into the working world, positions of power and leadership in American society. Is this, in your opinion, is this a crisis that only a generational change will be able to address and solve?
I hope it's not. I really do. I hope that for better, that the current government can maybe do something about it, or if not them, then a government soon to come, because the longer this issue is left unchecked, the worse it's going to get and the more people are going to die. But unfortunately, all the signs point to that it is going to take a massive generational shift in power here and who is in government to really bring about change that'll help stop this from happening.
I wanted to just ask you, we've got a minute or so left. There were a lot of people involved yesterday in the shooting, people who were traumatized. You have been through a school shooting yourself. If there was one bit of advice that you could give to the people who are still shell-shocked by what they experienced, what would it be?
Yeah, they're in hell right now, and it's a horrible place to be. And right now, hug your loved ones, keep them close, and cherish what you have. And I promise it does get better. I promise that you learn to live with the new normal. You learn to adapt. Humans are very adaptable, even through tragedy. And all I can say is that I truly, truly do hope that if nothing else, something good does come out of this, and something can change that will help save lives further down the line.
Yeah, I think a lot of people share that sentiment exactly. Louis Mizen, we appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and to share your story as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
The British public has a right to expect more from their Prime Minister. That is one of the main findings in a highly anticipated report published today on what has become known as the Partygate scandal. The report looked into a series of lockdown-breaking parties in Boris Johnson's offices in Downing Street, some of which he attended and on one occasion was fined for, in fact, because he broke the law. The entire Partygate scandal has dogged Johnson for months now, raising a question mark over the future of his premiership. But for now, at least, he appears to be going nowhere.
The report's release had been awaited for months. It details what happened at 16 events attended by the Prime Minister or his staff while England was under strict pandemic lockdown measures. The investigation found at least some of the gatherings in question represent a serious failure to observe not just the high standards expected of those working at the heart of government, but also of the standards expected of the entire British population at the time. The report also includes photos showing Johnson and staffers gathering in breach of restrictions. Author Sue Gray concluded there were failures of leadership and judgment. Some of the events should not have been allowed to take place. Other events should not have been allowed to develop as they did. In Parliament, the Prime Minister once again said he was sorry.
With permission, I take full responsibility for everything that took place on my watch. Mr. Speaker, I am humbled and I have learned a lesson, Mr. Speaker.
Labour opposition leader Keir Starmer repeated his call for Johnson to step down.
You cannot be a lawmaker and a lawbreaker. And it's time to pack his bags.
While polls at one time showed a majority thought Johnson should resign, few believe there will be any consequences.
I'm not convinced Boris Johnson will ever learn his lesson, if I'm being honest. And that's just...
No, absolutely agree. I think it's a complete slap in the face of the whole public.
And I feel like the future generation's being misled to believe that, oh, you can do all of this stuff while you're in power and you can just get away with it.
The Prime Minister has ruled out stepping down, saying instead that it's time to move on.
All right, for more now, I'm joined from London by Aaron Bastani. He is a journalist and co-founder of the Novara Media Network. Aaron, it's good to have you on the program. The Prime Minister has no intention of resigning, it seems. His Conservative Party is not going to force him to do that. So how safe and secure is he in his post tonight?
I think he's very safe and secure. I mean, as I'm sure you and your colleagues are well aware in politics, it's a dangerous game to make predictions. But I think he's very secure. The whispers are that there'll be a general election at the last possible moment. We'd now be looking at January 2025. In their calculus, that's 2.5 years away. A lot changes, a lot can happen. And of course, there are massive problems for the British public more generally on inflation, rising prices, potential recession next year. So their view is they can get clear water between these events and the next election. But as you say, right now, around 59% of the public thinks Johnson should resign, but most of those people saying he should resign also think he won't.
And do people really care about this report and Partygate? I mean, as you say, there are other issues, bigger issues than whether or not there was a party during the lockdown, but have people just moved on mentally?
I think many have, and I think this is one of those cases where it's an obsession of the media class. It is, but I also think it is creating real problems for the government. This story, which has been on the agenda now 6, 7, 8 months, of course, the events which the story is covering precede that, but they've been in the public eye for 6, 7, 8 months. This means that the government can't really get ahead and set the agenda on other stories. It's really sticking the feet of the Johnson administration in the mud. And so it is creating really big problems. What's interesting is, as I've said, 59% of the public thinks Johnson should resign. But actually, of Tory voters in 2019, 63, 64% think he shouldn't resign. So you have this very interesting polarization. Virtually every Liberal Democrat, every Labour voter from 2019 thinks he should go in the high 80s. And yet a majority of Tory voters think he shouldn't. So that, I think, is the key statistic that Boris Johnson and his staffers will show to their parliamentarians, show to the doubters, and they'll say, look, we've got 2.5 years, let's get through this, and things can change.
Yeah, I mean, we've got this common theme in tonight's program, democratically elected governments that seem to get away with ignoring the will of the people. Here you've got a case in the UK. From outside the UK, it appears, though, that the Johnson administration could be described as one that doesn't care about rules and doesn't abide by the rules and gets away with it 100% impunity. Is that an accurate description?
I think it is. It's reasonably accurate. Obviously, there have been some consequences. Allegra Stratton, for instance, one of his chief spinners, had to resign because she was joking in a private video, which was then later publicly released, about them having private parties. There have been some consequences. There was a police investigation. There was the Sue Gray report. I think perhaps even more concerning than Johnson and his cronies being able to do something and get away with it is the fact that you have had a police investigation by the London Metropolitan Police Service, and they've not really found anything untoward on the part of Johnson. So he's already been found to have breached the rules once. He was given a fixed penalty notice. But then of all of this evidence that we've seen now, all these photos and so on, the Metropolitan Police Service, which is, of course, the London Police Service, they saw these photos and they said, well, nothing wrong here. Move along. No need to process further fixed penalty notices for the Prime Minister. So I think, yes, it poses questions for Boris Johnson. But actually, I think if you look at this in the whole and take a step back, it asks even bigger ones of the Metropolitan Police Service.
Well, what would that be? What's the biggest question?
Well, I think there's clearly not been an equal application of the rules. You know, you had people who were having protests outdoors who were being fined, £10,000 for in no way breaching the rules like Boris Johnson and various staffers have at Number 10. You have instances, for instance, of some of those images where one or two attendees at that event have been fined, but not the Prime Minister.
Well, where's
and
the
question
outrage?
has to be how.
Where's the outrage, though, over that, Aaron? That's what I think a lot of people look at and they just don't understand. I mean, it's obvious what you're saying. It's obvious that there is a double standard here in enforcing the law, and yet the public seems to just, they swallow it and take it, and that's it.
Well, I think there's three parts to the answer there. The first is that they've not just swallowed it. I think many people have, but not everyone. You look at recent by-elections, the Tories have been thumped. Before all of this, last summer, the Tories were flying high. They had sensational local election results. They were winning by-elections, which British governments tend not to do in government. They tend to lose by-elections, which are kind of like a midterm in the US. So there has been a political overhead. That's one part of the answer. The second part is that, Boris Johnson is what you might call an honest liar. He never sold himself as a figure of integrity and honesty and truth to the public. And so for many people, this is kind of priced in. And then finally, as we've just touched upon a moment ago, there are bigger political problems on the horizon, namely rising prices and inflation.
Yeah, even for an honest liar. Journalist Aaron Bastani, we appreciate your insights tonight, Aaron. Thank you.
Pleasure.
The European Union is moving to confiscate and sell rather than simply freeze the assets of Russian oligarchs. According to the European Union, Russian assets worth 10 billion euros have already been frozen. Many in Brussels now say that the money gained by confiscating the assets could help to finance rebuilding Ukraine. But some EU members, such as Germany, they are skeptical.
The villa of Russian oligarch Alisher Usmanov being seized by Italy's financial police on the island of Sardinia. Usmanov is a billionaire and close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin. He's only one of hundreds of oligarchs that the European Union has slapped with sanctions since Russia invaded Ukraine. At the moment, it's difficult to confiscate luxury assets like this in the EU. But the EU Commission, the EU's executive arm, wants to change that. Assets will be confiscated if a link to criminal activity can be proven. Under the proposed legislation, evading EU sanctions, for example by transferring assets to family members, could become illegal. But some say this won't hurt the Russian economy.
I think that this is done in more symbolic, with a symbolic reason to try and explain that, no, you will be seized if you are outside your jurisdiction.
The EU says that Russian assets worth 10 billion euros have been frozen in the bloc. Brussels wants to use this money to help to rebuild Ukraine. But that's easier said than done. In some countries like Germany, this would collide with private property laws.
There are guarantees for private assets in our constitution, in our rule-based order. And we have very, very precise to consider what we are doing when we abolish these guarantees for private sector assets.
If the law is passed, Russian oligarchs would have a much harder time getting their hands on their villas again.
And finally, the image of 19 small children and 2 teachers in a classroom shot dead by a man who had announced his plans to kill and who had bought guns on his 18th birthday. The world knows that America has a gun problem. Many Americans realize this too, including the coach of the NBA team, the Golden State Warriors. We thought this could be worth your attention.
I'm not going to talk about basketball. Nothing's happened with our team in the last 6 hours. We're going to start the same way tonight. Any basketball questions don't matter. Since we left shoot-around, 14 children were killed 400 miles from here, and a teacher. And in the last 10 days, we've had elderly black people killed in a supermarket in Buffalo. We've had Asian churchgoers killed in Southern California, and now we have children murdered at school. When are we going to do something? I'm tired. I'm so tired of getting up here and offering condolences to the devastated families that are out there. I'm so tired of the, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm tired of the moments of silence. Enough. There's 50 senators right now who refuse to vote on H.R. 8, which is a background check rule that the House passed a couple of years ago. It's been sitting there for 2 years. And there's a reason they won't vote on it, to hold on to power. So I ask you, Mitch McConnell, I ask all of you senators who refuse to do anything about the violence and school shootings and supermarket shootings, I ask you, are you going to put your own desire for power ahead of the lives of our children and our elderly and our churchgoers? Because that's what it looks like.
Well, the day is almost done. The conversation, it continues online. You'll find us on Twitter, either at DW News. You can follow me on Twitter at Brent Goff TV. And remember, whatever happens between now and then, tomorrow is another day. We'll see you then, everybody.